Sir President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 2894 under Committee Report number 200. This is the bill on the basic law for Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, Mr. President.
Consideration of measure is in order.
Sir President, the parliamentary status is that we are in the period of interpellation. I thus move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Marcos.
Senator Marcos is recognized as the principal sponsor of the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President.
On the continuance of the interpellation of Senator Sotto,
May we recognize Senator Sotto?
Senator Sotto is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, will the distinguished gentleman from Ilocos Norte continue to yield to my interpellations on the basic law that we are discussing? I am halfway to part one, Mr. President.
Thank you. Certainly, Mr. President, I will happily yield to the gentleman from Quezon City.
Thank you. Last time around, Mr. President, we were discussing Section 20. I had a number of questions. The distinguished gentleman was able to enlighten me on most of the points that we have raised, and there were perhaps proposed amendments that will come in later on. Now, if I may continue, last time around it was Section 20, and I asked about the Coast Guard. I distinctly still remember the answers of the gentleman, so I will move on to my next question, still on Section 20. Mr. President, what would be the benefit or goal of creating a Bangsamoro Autonomous Regional Disaster Reduction and Management Council, the BARDRRMC? Could it not be possible for the NDRRMC, which admittedly has better experience, manpower, and equipment, to do it?
I think, Mr. President, one should just should view this as, again, a similar arrangement, not exactly the same, but a similar arrangement to what we have in the provinces, where you have the PDRRMC, the Provincial Disaster and Risk Reduction. So that will be that they who work in consonance, who work together with the NDRRMC, and that is going to be the same situation. They will not be a standalone organization in the sense that they are independent from the supervision of the NDRMC, but will be again an enhanced version of the provincial disaster risk reduction entity. But in this case, rather than being provincial, it will be on a regional basis. This is one of the new organizations that we really do not have at the moment. We don't have any exact equivalent. We do not have any regional offices of the NDRMC, but this will have to be the first, and it will be, I suppose, will follow the model of the next largest political territory, which subdivision, which is the province. So many of these offices that exist at the provincial level, we have enhanced so that they will now operate at a regional level, even if there is, as I said, no equivalent anywhere else around the country. So that is the continuing. This is the continuing redefinition of the entities, the organs of government, the offices, the agencies. But again, we have always looked to the example and the model of the local government code, and we try to make it as not necessarily similar, but with the same. We can say that they are following the same concepts in terms of administration and provision of services.
Meron nakalagay, we shall complement and be aligned with the Oh. Well, Mr. President, I do see your point, but I was just hoping that it could be very prominent in this particular section, the participation of the NDRRMC, pretty much like the other councils in the other regions that we have right now. So there is no mention to that effect. So will you be willing to accept an amendment?
Yes, certainly. If it will help to clarify the situation, it is it was again in a parallel. It was a parallel arrangement that we have for provinces. But if it is not clear that the NDRMC is still the national body which comes and tries to mitigate the effects of a disaster, then we can certainly put that language in.
All right.
There is only one issue about that, Mr. President, that upon further thought, there was actually a reason why we did not specify that. Again,
In the original, I'm sorry to butt in, but in the original version that was proposed to us, it's included.
But we tried to remove. We tried to maintain as much of the autonomous nature of the organizations, the agencies within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region as much as possible. I think effectively, whether or not we put that in, if there is a disaster in Muslim Mindanao, then it is. I think no one will contradict us when we say the NDRMC is still going to play a very large part in coordination with the regional offices. However, the strict definition as to their relationship is something that we have not really defined, and perhaps more discussion is required to come to some kind of consensus as to how close or how independent these organizations, these entities, such as the Regional Risk Reduction Council, will have with the NDRMC. As I have repeatedly said, we are defining a kind of government that we need to look into so as to decide what will be the best arrangement for them. But again, I have always tried to err on the side of autonomy, to try and as much as possible maintain as much autonomy as possible, at least for some such issues such as this. However, again, whatever the Bangsamoro government decides in terms of their connection or in terms of the support that they will require from the national government, in terms of the kind of coordination that they will, then it is up for them again to decide how much or how little the assistance that they will ask from the national government. I would predict that it will be very similar to something like what happens in the provinces, where they take care of the disaster as much as they can, and then if they declare a calamity, that is when it affects several provinces. That is when the national government comes in. I presume with the regional national government, in terms of the kind of coordination that they will, then it is up for them again to decide how much or how little the assistance that they will ask from the national government. I would predict that it will be very similar to something like what happens in the provinces, where they take care of the disaster as much as they can, and then if they declare a calamity, that is when it affects several provinces. That is when the national government comes in. I presume With the regional government, it will be different because 3 provinces, NDRMC, 2 to 3 provinces, 2 regions. Pagka naapektuhan na, papasok na NDRMC. Ito buong region na ito. So, again, I think we leave it to them to decide when does the national government come in. As I said, in the LGU, it comes in when the national assistance comes in when a calamity is officially declared by the Sanggunian of the province. And the NDRMC actually does not need any further action to come in if it has affected more than one province. So this will have to be slightly different. Yung mga qualification na yun, 1 province, 2 provinces, 2 regions, etc., mawawala na siguro yun. We'll have to redefine kung kailan papasok yung NDRMC. That's a good point, Mr. President. It is another thing that we have to, one of the finer points that we have to look into and find the best possible arrangement.
All right. Considering the answers given by the gentleman, I will, and following his line, I will give it further thought also before I propose the amendment. Thank you for that, Mr. President. Now, going to public order and safety, how will the creation of the Bangsamoro Basic Law affect the structure of the Philippine National Police in the region? What will be the role of the Bangsamoro regional government as regards to public order and safety, Mr. President?
Well, again, in the same fashion as the coordination that is being done between provincial governors, city mayors, municipal mayors, any local chief executives with the police. I think the gentleman's experience in local government will have shown him that it is impossible to conduct the peace and order operations in any LGU without close coordination between the commanders of the police in that area and the local government. In this case, I believe that will be the same. However, the reason that it is that we have put that provision, a very simple one, is to make very, very clear that the police in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region are still under the direct supervision of the Chief PNP and ultimately the President. Because if you remember, Mr. President, this was one of the areas that caused a great deal of alarm with some of our countrymen when the language in the draft BBL could possibly be interpreted as having mandated to that the Bangsamoro police be under the command of the chief minister. There was no mention of its connection to the PNP. So we wanted to make that very clear. First, for constitutional reasons, the Constitution is very clear. It says that there will be one civilian police force for the entire country. So we cannot have two, one PNP and another in the Bangsamoro. Furthermore, the fear of repeating the same mistake of the policemen becoming part of a private army for whoever is sitting sitting as the political leader in the area is something that we wanted to avoid. We will never forget the terrible consequences of the arrangement wherein that the PNP or even the police force is working solely for the political leadership, not for the national government. It is a problem that we had hoped to avoid. And so that is why I made sure it was very, very clear that all the policemen in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, of course, cannot do their jobs without close coordination with the political hierarchy in Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, primarily the Chief Minister. But however, the point that they are still part of the PNP is the chain of command starting from the chief, from the commander-in-chief, all the way down to to the lowest ranked police officer is very, very clear. Hindi napapatid yung chain of command mula sa Pangulo hanggang sa Chief PNP hanggang sa bawat police. Pati na yung qualification, the requirements to become a police officer, the requirements to become to be part of the police, whether in Bangsamoro, even in Bangsamoro, should have the same requirements as all other policemen around the country. Parang pinagpantay lang talaga natin. And the best description that I had about the Bangsamoro police, that it will be a enhanced regional office of the PNP. Meron naman tayong regional command, meron tayong regional director. So this will be the equivalent of that, but it will again be slightly different dahil isang entity lamang. But yung talagang binibigyan namin ng pansin ay yung kinakatakutan ng marami na hindi na susunod yung mga pulis sa Bangsamoro sa commander nila sa Krame. And that is something that we had hoped to make very clear.
All right, Mr. President, I am one with the distinguished gentleman on the issue of caution. I do understand that, and I'm glad that you're looking at it that way. And given your experience also as the governor of Ilocos Norte, you would be very much in the know on how this should be handled. Now, help me try to understand what you explained with regards to the structure. Your section on public order and safety is very simple. It says the Philippine National Police, PNP, shall have primary responsibility over public order and safety within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. I browsed through the original bill. It doesn't have any mention of any structure also. No? Like it just says, Bangsamoro government shall have primary responsibility over public order and safety within the Bangsamoro. It shall have powers over public order and safety, including those related to jail management, fire prevention, and trainings in public safety. The central government and the Bangsamoro government shall cooperate and coordinate through the intergovernmental relations mechanism. Sino nga ba yung tinutukoy nilang central government dito? Yung tayo, no? The national government, and you have removed that already. All right. So what happens to the jail management and the fire prevention and the structure of the relationship to the Philippine National Police? Would you have a bird's eye view? Can you give me a bird's eye view on how the structure would be as far as the PNP and the other mentioned is concerned? 113. I am being told by Senator Pimentel that you have it in Section 113.
On section, Section 111 on page 52 of the substitute bill also speaks of the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Regional Police, but again, is an integral part of the PNP. As to the specific structure of the PNP, in Section 113, there is a detailed. In Section 113, there is a detailed description of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Regional Police Organization, and it gives a specific structure putting together the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region Police. So jail management and penology, we left it in the exclusive powers of the national government.
All right. I see that in Article 11, which is probably in my second or third part of the interpellation, you are right, it is right there, but I don't see the structure either, except that there is a redundancy on the issue of public order and safety. Pwede tayong tumalon dun, but I'd
At
rather...
in the next page, Mr. President, section 113,
Oo.
there is a more detailed description of
Ayun,
the structure of the
All right.
the Philippine National Police. Most importantly, its relationship again
All right.
with the headquarters, with the entire command structure of the PNP.
All right. Do you think this issue or this why is it necessary to be described here in Section 20, or I mean included in Section 20, public order and safety? Why is it necessary when there is a whole article and number of sections in the forthcoming?
Because that is Section 11 is
Section 20.
Section 20 is just an enumeration
All
of
right.
the powers, the concurrent powers enumerated. So if at the top of the page it reads, concurrent powers enumerated hereunder shall be exercised through a system of consultation. So these are all the shared powers between the national government and the regional government.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you, Mr. President. Then in that case, I will suspend my questions on the issue of the Philippine National Police in the region. Let me just move on and continue with Section 20 because we will get there to Section or Article 11.
Very
later
well,
on.
certainly, Mr.
All right, thank you very much. Number 13 of your Section 20. Why is the welfare of the non-Moro indigenous peoples, the creation of the Ministry for Non-Moro Indigenous Peoples, as well as the recognition of their ancestral domains, ancestral lands, and their rights thereto to be included, covered in the Bangsamoro Basic Law? Mr. President, hindi ba parang rider ito? Why should the Ministry of Non-Moro Indigenous People be included in the Bangsamoro Cabinet, Mr. President?
This is simply to guarantee that the rights and privileges enjoyed by the non-Moro indigenous peoples, specifically in general, but specifically on an ancestral domain, are well understood and will be recognized by the national government and the local government. We are, however, although the IPRA law is already there, we felt that it would not hurt. Again, if you will notice, there are several instances actually in the substitute bill where we refer to the national law that is relevant to that particular subject. This is one of those instances where, although there is an IPRA law, which of course we assume that the Bangsamoro government will have to comply with, again, because there have been many cases in Muslim Mindanao of conflict over the ancestral domain, and this was a point that was brought to us by the IPs during our hearing, that we would just like to be very, very clear that those rights and privileges as laid out in the IPRA law should be very clearly followed. To that end, we are actually organized a cabinet ministry for the non-Moro indigenous people, and its essential role is to be certain that none of the rights of the indigenous peoples are trampled on or somehow ignored. That is something that we found necessary, because it was a matter of great importance to the leaders of the different indigenous peoples groups, and to the point, it is so important to the point that they will say it came out during our hearings that there might, if the conflict reaches such a certain pitch and it will not be resolved, there might be renewed fighting. So we wanted to remove that as a possible potential source of conflict, and conflict that can reach such a heated level that there will be actual violence between different groups. So it's just again, although it is not strictly necessary, but we felt that it did no harm and probably some good to leave it in and to remind again us and the incoming Bangsamoro government, that these principles need to be recognized and held close to the actions of the government.
But you see, Mr. President, the creation of a ministry for non-Moro indigenous peoples. Ang dating po sa akin, at naintindihan ko naman sana yung explanation nyo, ang dating po sa akin, parang ipinapasailalim natin sila sa Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
Payag naman sila doon. Hindi naman sila tumututol doon. Ang sinasabi lang nila, ang kanilang pangamba ay sinasabi, baka pag nabuo na ang Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, ay meron pupunta ron, ay hindi niya inyo to. Dahil Bangsamoro na ito eh.
Yun na nga.
Yun ang kanilang kinakatakutan. Kaya gusto nilang, nais nilang liwanagin ng mabuti sa batas na hindi dapat pabayaan ng ganyang klaseng pangyayari.
So the ministry in no way will be able to interfere in the non-Moro indigenous people's actions or policies.
Well, I would imagine the ministries, the work of the ministry will be to make sure that the rights of the non-Moro indigenous peoples are protected. And should a decision or a discussion, let's say, in a hypothetical cabinet meeting, begin to encroach upon those rights and privileges, then it will be the role of the minister of for non-Moro indigenous peoples to speak up and to say, to do that. Kung itutuloy natin yan,
for their protection.
Oo, masasagasaan natin ang ating mga IP. So, wag na natin gawin yan dahil labag sa batas at hindi karapatan nila yan. So, that is something that will, in a kind of a IPRA watchdog, if you will, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, thank you for that, because I know for a fact that the debates that we are having will be included as part of the law later on, if that it will be necessary, and once this is questioned. Anyway, going to Islamic banking, Mr. President. Matters relating to Islamic banking shall be shared by the national government and the Bangsamoro regional government as provided for in your Section 20, Paragraph 14. However, supervision over banks and non-banks financial institutions under the jurisdiction of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is a reserved power of the national government. So what are the differences of the two provisions then, Mr. President?
Well, it makes this. It is again separates the Islamic banking system is quite different from the regular banking system that we use. However, once again, monetary policy and fiscal policy are dictated by the national government. So it still has to fall under the direct supervision of the Bangko Sentral, especially in terms of monetary policy.
Pwede niyo ba kami... go ahead.
Sorry, but the supervision of all banking activity has to come under the supervision of the BSP. So we still have the BSP there to make sure that it is being conducted properly and according to law. But again, it is a different system. So it can be viewed as being distinct and separate from the regular banking system. It is actually the traditional banking system that is already being exercised not only in the Philippines but around the country amongst Islamic banks. So,
for my continuing education, Mr. President, what is the difference? Sabi mo, iba yung Islamic banking. Paano po ba yung Islamic
the
banking?
very simple difference is that walang interest. Pag nangutang ka, bawal it is not allowed in the Quran to charge what they actually refer to as usury.
So there is no need for usury law in the Islamic banking.
Well, they're not under Islamic law. The banks do not. They can impose charges, but they cannot impose an interest payment on the
loans.
And also,
what about savings? Are there the interest given to savings by the banks?
I am not an expert, Mr. President, on Islamic banking. Perhaps We will try to gain an answer to your question. But to further explore the subject, the transfer also of monies is done in a different way. From one Islamic bank, from a person to an Islamic bank. The reporting is also different.
Are there Islamic banks in the Metro Manila, Mr. President?
I do not think so, Mr. President. I do not think that there are Islamic banks. I could be wrong.
Because I am suddenly interested.
Well, there is the Alamana Bank, but they are already owned by the DBP.
I have plenty of loans, Mr. President, so perhaps I can transfer it to the Islamic banking system.
I will watch your experience. I will watch a gentleman's experience, Mr. President. Baka makatipid din kami sa interest payment.
Anyway, I will expect your
Okay, so on the specific
once you get the specific yes,
question of the savings accounts on how they are handled.
Now, who will be responsible for insurance matters in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, Mr. President?
It will still come under the regulatory attention of the national government still and its agencies, because.
No.
We have language. 1-5.
Is that can we be clarified if that's a reserved power? It's not listed in the list of powers, Mr. President. So is that part of the reserved power?
Yes.
It's not listed in the list of powers, Mr. President. So is that part of the reserved power?
Yes. Mr. President, we have an answer to the question of the gentleman on the
Yes.
savings account. On savings accounts in the Islamic banking system. It is also more simple than the regular commercial banks. A deposit is seen as is treated as an investment. So once the investment is made, should the investment prosper, the profits are shared. But if there is a loss, so are the losses shared.
Oh no.
So it cuts both ways, Mr. President.
I see.
Hindi yung kita lang, pero kung pag nalugi rin,
Maganda dahil may kita pag maganda. Pero pagka nalugi, dito na ako sa regular banking. All right, thank you for that, Mr. President.
To return on the question of all
sa
of
insurance.
again because the closest language we have to that is has to do with banking and finance in section 114. Because again, this section 20 is just an enumeration. And the way it will function is the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region Fiscal Policy Board. But they have, again, the functions are outlined here. It has to do more with the determination of fiscal and monetary policy. There is no specific language in the substitute bill on insurance, Mr. President.
So what do we plan to do there, Mr. President? Would you mind if we incorporate something to that effect?
The general principle that we also followed is that if it has not been delegated, expressly delegated, then those functions remain with the national government.
All right. So it remains with the national government if it's not mentioned here, huh?
That's the general rule, yes.
That's the general rule. Okay, I will accept that, Mr. President, in that case. Thank you. All right. Health, Science, Technology, Research Councils and Scholarships, libraries, museums, historical. What would be the role of the national government in the libraries, museums, as well as the historical and cultural sites in the Bangsamoro regional government?
Well, specifically with archaeological sites, it will still have to be done together with the national government, the National Historical Commission, to declare an historically important site. But again, the Bangsamoro government can designate. They have the power to establish libraries and museums and to also declare historical and cultural sites independent of the NHA, of the NHC, National Historical Commission. But when it comes to the regulation, the excavation, preservation, exportation of cultural properties, then the coordination has to be done with the National Historical Commission.
Okay.
This is we allow that again that kind of autonomy because it is felt that the Bangsamoro, the inhabitants of the Bangsamoro and the scholars of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region will be the ones who are best qualified to designate what places, what dates are actually culturally and historically important to the Bangsamoro people, and so we leave it to them. However, again, when there are actions to be taken, the National Historical Commission is also in coordination with them.
Okay, thank you. Well, just rewinding a little on your science and technology, there are blank provisions under Section 20 in your enumeration, particularly 16 and 17, Research Council and Scholarships. Are you going to fill this up during the committee amendments, or this is it?
Well, that was the form that was in the draft BBL. And we felt there was no need to change. It cannot really be too general. The science and technology that the Bangsamoro government should choose to undertake is entirely up to them. The same thing in terms of research councils and scholarships. We anticipate that there will be many. There have been prospective pledges of support from many other countries, and I think not only in economic development but also in research and study, study of the Islamic culture and the promotion of Islamic culture. So again, I felt that it was best to be administered by the Bangsamoro government and to leave them as free a hand as we can. That's why those are left at a just very generally. I had no intention of making any qualification to those two areas of powers.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. Now, speaking of the old draft of the bill, of BBL, no? There is a subparagraph on land registration under concurrent powers, but the same was deleted in this, your revised version. May we know the reason for the deletion? Does it now imply that this will be a reserved power of the national government, since it's neither under concurrent powers nor exclusive powers of the regional government based on the revised proposed bill? In your proposed
essentially, this is an attempt to to avoid any possible confusion in land titling. Again, many of we touched upon it earlier. when we spoke about the non-Moro indigenous peoples, that many of the conflicts are over land. In fact, almost all the conflicts that break out into fighting is all about land. Therefore, if the land registration of the Bangsamoro government, their listing does not agree with the LRA's listing, then that will be cause of great confusion, and it is not possible to administer that. We will then have to put in an adjudication process, which will probably take time, a great deal of time. So we felt that the LRA, as it stands in the national government, is sufficient for to determine the land, the status of the different lands around within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. I see the wisdom and in that action, Mr. President. Now, will it be also safe to assume that the paragraph on penology and penitentiary, which was also deleted under your concurrent powers, be considered a reserved power of the national government?
Yes, again, because it was necessary that we be
concurrent powers be considered a reserved power of the national government?
Yes, again, because it was necessary that we be consistent with the organizational structure that we have nationally. Because again, we cannot have consistent with the organizational structure that we have nationally. Because again, we cannot have differences in the way that the jails are managed, in the way that the prisoners are managed within the system. So that is why we left it. We put it back to the national government and put it under the auspices of the national government. So it will still remain under the BJMP.
All right. There are items under concurrent powers and exclusive powers that were also deleted in our substitute bill now. Can we now assume that since those items, like establishments of GOCCs, financial institutions, water supply, services, flood control, irrigation, registration of births, marriages, deaths, among others, they were not anymore to be found in any of the section on concurrent and exclusive powers. So those powers are reserved powers of the national government?
That is right, Mr. President, because when we were studying these different areas, it became clearer and clearer that some of them can be concurrent powers, but can be devolved powers to the autonomous region. However, there in certain areas, like in the question of the GOCCs, there was a constitutional question. That is what that we had to remedy. In the terms of similar to the BJMP, and later on you will also find it in the there are several other areas where essentially it was found if there were two distinct bodies undertaking the same function, if there is a conflict between the two, eventually we would have to rule in favor of the national government, because it is the local government, it's the national government. So, but that is, we felt was unnecessary. If the functions are still emanate from the national government's offices, and therefore, again, that consistency in policy, in management, and in administration would be carried through to the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
I'm just interested in the issue of registration of births and deaths. There was a question during the Mama Sapano hearings that I posed on the issue of death certificates of those who died. who were part of either MILF or some of the groups that were involved in the battle or the massacre, whatever what you would want to call it. Did we get an answer on how the death certificates were registered so that we would know really how many died?
That is one of the problems. That is why the registration of births became, we kept it again under one organization, because there have been instances where, let us say, a combatant has been declared dead when in fact they have not died. Halimbawa, yung nagiging wanted, pagka sinasabi, patay na. Pero ang nangyari, hindi pa naman patay, at they are now operating under a different name. Again, it is well within the, it is well recognized within the Muslim culture, as we have experienced, to use aliases to begin with. So with that, with that aspect in mind, at least we thought that there should be a general and authoritative listing of deaths and births. So again, because we thus far in the past experience, that part of the recording of the bureaucracy has not certainly been, well, for one reason, because there is conflict, and secondly, the use of aliases is widespread in the Muslim community. It is not something that those of us not in the Muslim community are that familiar with. We were all very surprised when the chief negotiator was found to have to be using an alias. But the more we studied the issue, the less of an issue it became. But we learned that, in fact, that this is part of the culture, that a nom de guerre is something that is fairly common, even when not in actual conflict. So this is something that we try to accommodate and to make sure that despite that practice, that we still have an authoritative listing of deaths and births, so that we have a good database for all of the inhabitants of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. This is also important in terms of the decommissioning. One of the first steps of decommissioning is the identification of combatants. And so we so if we again have that authority, unless we have that authoritative list, then it's very difficult to cross-check on who is who. Are they still alive? Have they already in fact died? So that is that's another aspect to that we felt was necessary, to have a accepted by all a list of births and deaths that is accepted by all parties.
Well, I will have to agree that the more you discuss it, the clearer it gets. I distinctly remember I was chiding Chairman Iqbal in one of the hearings. I said I did not want to talk to him because my mother taught me not to talk to strangers. And during that But of course, he's no longer a stranger. We were talking, and he was explaining to me some points in the issue of the proposed bill.
I think that happened. It was a surprise to all of us.
Yes.
But the more we studied the issue, it became, as I said, less of an issue.
But then again, Mr. President,
because it's something that is commonplace, and it really does not impact on, for example, the peace process. It does not impact on the legality of the documents that Chairman Iqbal has signed. So it is, again, it is something that is different from our usual practice, but it is something that I feel we can accommodate as long as we make very, very clear that the official lists of the deaths and births. So long as we have that, then the administrative side of it can still continue to function, and at the same time accommodate the practices of having a nom de guerre or having an alias.
But you will have to agree with me. There was a question before. I already asked you this some time ago, that if you had a daughter and your daughter is going to get married, you do not want her husband to sign an alias in the marriage contract.
Well, certainly not. But then that is why. But if we have that list that I speak of, they can then cite that, and the official documents will have the proper name, and my daughter will have a good idea of who she is marrying.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Let me move on to Section 21. Section 21 broadly gives the Bangsamoro Regional Government the exclusive power to exercise jurisdiction on various matters specifically enumerated on Section 21. May we know what kind of powers are these, considering that Article 10, Section 20 of the Constitution only gives legislative powers to autonomous regions?
Well, aside from the powers that are listed in the Constitution, there are other devolved or exclusive powers that are listed in the draft BBL. And as much as possible, we left that list alone, except for those areas, such as where we felt it is a concurrent power because it needed coordination with the national government. So all of these powers are, at least in our estimation, are powers and functions that can be undertaken at the local level. That does not need assistance or coordination or even permission from the national government. So those areas that I suppose the principle of subsidiarity, where we keep the function to the smallest possible unit that can actually manage that can actually perform that function. So kung kaya na ng local, wag na natin dalhin sa national. And sa aming palagay, itong listahan na ito na nasa substitute bill, dahil this is not exactly the same as what the draft BBL had. We have put some in concurrent powers. We have changed some of the descriptions. But as far as we can determine, these powers that are enumerated in Section 21 are powers and function and the accompanying functions that will exercise those powers can in fact be undertaken, can be implemented by the Bangsamoro government, and without any requirement of coordination, of permission, of cooperation with the national government.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. President. Now, the President is given general supervision over the exclusive or devolved powers of the Bangsamoro Regional Government. May we know the extent and nature of this general supervision? Who shall have the final say on the exclusive and devolved powers?
It will have to. On exclusive and devolved powers, it will be the Bangsamoro government. The general supervision that we speak of is the general supervision that the President exercises over all political subdivisions, over all local government units. That will be the same. That will apply the same in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. For example, however, if the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region undertakes a monetary policy, or let's say an investment policy that is totally contrary to the national policy, then that is when that supervision can step in, and the President will no doubt inform the Chief Minister of the variance in policy direction, and we'll have to find a way to put the policy of the Bangsamoro in line with the rest of the country.
Still on the issue of exclusive or devolved powers, your number 6 states, barter trade and counter trade with Indonesia, Malaysia, or Brunei subject to existing laws. Why is barter trade with Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei included in the exclusive powers of the Bangsamoro Regional Government? Why are these countries specifically mentioned or provided for in your substitute bill? What would be the role of the Bureau of Customs on that matter?
Well, the conduct, as we know, the barter trade and counter trade is another traditional form of commerce or exchange in Muslim Mindanao. We know that that the southern Mindanao conducts a great deal of informal, quote unquote, business with Indonesia, with Malaysia, and with Brunei. And the reason that we have the list of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei is that, as a matter of fact, those are the only three countries that there is barter trade or counter trade with Muslim Mindanao. So again, in terms of the customs, since they do not collect tariff, then they are not the customs need not be included in the process of barter trade and counter trade.
Alin? Hindi. Hindi regulatory body magre-regulate nito, no? Is this your catch-all, yung subject to existing laws?
Yes.
That is your catch-all. So that would be the role of the Bureau of Customs. Doon papasok.
Wala kasi exception ito sa there are no customs duties that are collected. There are no tariffs when it comes to barter trade and counter trade. So that exchange, it is an exchange of goods essentially, which we do not impose duties upon. There is a small element within the description of counter trade where some cash sometimes is exchanged, but this again is in very small amounts. It is only to make up the value of whatever is being exchanged. Halimbawa, you exchange a table for a chair. The chair is less expensive, so you'll make up the difference with a little cash. But that is the extent of the use of cash in the barter trade and in the counter trade.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. What are included in the term public utilities, your number 12? You're referring to this in Section 21, Paragraph 12, and Section 22, Paragraph E. Public utilities. Ano po ang mga kasama nun?
Well, public utilities are what we normally think of, the provision of electricity, water, garbage of public utilities.
Saan ito?
Transportation, some communication, but the distinct difference again is that these are the systems, whether the utility systems that are within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. It is most specifically when we go to section paragraph 11 of the same section, we speak in in quite some detail about how the Bangsamoro government is in fact regulates the power generation, distribution, and transmission if all of those activities are done within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. However, that situation changes the moment that that source of power connects to the national grid.
Yeah.
And the minute it does that, then they come under the regulation of the ERC.
So within, sila lang. All right. Thank you, Mr. President.
The general test is that these systems are operating only
within
in
yes.
the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
Thank you. Number 18, still on Section 21. Regulations on manufacture and distribution of foods, drinks, drugs, and tobacco for the welfare of the inhabitants in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. What will particularly be regulated in the manufacture and distribution of foods, drugs, and tobacco for the welfare of the inhabitants of the BAR? Will it have its own BIFAD?
No, they will still follow. They will still follow the accreditation or the approvals of the of the BIFAD. However, this is more to do with the prohibited goods and food that will and the regulation of such within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. It is also to allow them to implement or exercise Sharia law when it comes to such items that do not fall under the BIFAD, the BIFAD do not accredit or approve. So there will be slight differences, but again, it is based on Sharia law.
Without your explanation, I would have wanted to propose that this is unnecessary. We can remove this, but based on your explanation, okay, that's understandable, but let us put it clearly. I think
The
it's
delineation of powers,
best. Yes,
that is,
para maliwanag na hindi
There is
naman
not
nagtatayo ng bagong BIFAD doon. No? Or prohibited. It's under exclusive powers, Mr. President.
well, the regulation is their exclusive power.
Yun na nga eh.
But the
regulation.
enforcement still remains with, for example, the medicines that we take. The enforcement of the BIFAD as to their approval for use, for its therapeutic claims, etc., still maintained.
All be under the
will
national
still be the same under the under this regimen where you have the BIFAD deciding what are safe, what foods, what drugs are safe for use by our citizens. So if there are any items that fall that there are rules for in the Quran, if they fall out of if they are not part of what the BIFAD is doing, then the regional government steps in.